This was the opening move of Magnus Carlsen, world number 1 versus Gukesh D, World Chess Championship Challenger. This is the Superbet Rapid and Blitz, played in May 2024, a special tournament that I've been dissecting because we saw something unprecedented. More on that to come. Let's first dive in on this game. Magnus had that move played by Garry Kasparov. Does he take it back? No, he doesn't. He keeps it on the board and Gukesh goes d5 for a high five. Kasparov gives him one, strolls off the stage. This is over the board, Blitz chess. It's the penultimate day, such an exciting game. Magnus goes g3. He builds the banana hammock, prepares to fianchetto. Knight c6, a terrible second move when you've played d5, said Nimzovich. Gukesh mutters, screw the haters. We get d4 from Magnus, battle lines drawn, and bishop f5. Very natural. Are you going to go bishop g2? The most natural move. No. Magnus goes knight h4, putting a knight on the rim, hitting that bishop, or is he preparing to fianchetto the knight? The bishop comes into g4, and now we see bishop g2. Sanity prevails. e6 played, a solid pawn structure. Bad bishop outside, very nice. We get castles from Magnus. Bishop e7, hits the knight on the rim. Does Magnus move it? No. Classic, tricky Magnus move. He starts with pawn h3. And as ever, he's assessed it correctly. If you take here, and then we see takes here, and an exchange of those minor pieces, white emerges better. So bishop h5 played, the best move. Now Magnus drops back into f3. We see knight f6 and c4, the most explosive move on the board. Creates a kind of Catalan pawn structure. Very few people know it, but that opening is named after a chess playing cat called Alan. But here it's a bit different because the bishop's not on c8. Now we see castles played. Both players snug as a bug in a rug with their kings. Captures on d5, pawn recaptures, and knight c3. Magnus gives a whinny as he gallops into the game. So many top professionals do when they move the ponies. All four horsemen of the apocalypse out, and knight e4. The knight jumps just continue. Don't take on e4. Pawn recaptures. Your knight then getting kicked from f3 here. This pawn loose. So instead, we see knight e5. Look at the tension in the center. There is an option here to go pawn f5. Different game. Instead, we see captures on e5. Pawn recaptures. Knight takes on c3. Magnus's structure, bit of a mess. Pawn to c ships from Gukesh, creating a nice connect 3 here. And Magnus now goes wrong. And it's very instructive. The move he should play is g4 immediately. This bishop running short of squares, and we see it after f4. Now the best move in response is f5, because if you go f6, which you want to play, break up this structure, then there's f5 with tempo against the bishop. This is the top line, and now you achieve e6. How about that for a connect 4? White doing great. Now why do I show this line? Because Magnus started with f4. It allows Gukesh to go pawn f6. Never play it, says Ben Feingold, unless you need to, right? Undermine your opponent's pawn, which is spearheading the center. And now if Magnus goes g4, the bishop doesn't have to come here. This is what was played in the game. He can go here, bishop f7, no time for f5, or black just takes on e5. You're not picking up the tempo. So Magnus has to take on f6, a move he reluctantly makes. Gukesh plays a very nice intermezzo now, checks from c5, king h2 played, going to h1 looks natural, but okay, Magnus chooses the dark square, and now the queen can activate. Great play from Gukesh, he's sitting pretty. There are lines here where you ditch the c-pawn, just go for play with rook b1, bishop b2, but Magnus defends it with queen to d3, and now Gukesh D living up to his name, because he doesn't find the A move or the B move or the C move, which is bringing one of those rooks to the center. He plays the D move of bishop g6. Ugly stuff, because you hit the queen, but you waltz straight into f5. Now maybe he was doing it to induce a weakness along this diagonal, and he takes a pause here. There's some very cool lines where you bring the rook to the centre, sack the bishop, but then go check, bring a queen to e5 and start doing some nasty stuff. F-file also open, but we won't go down that line. Wasn't played. We see bishop f7 on the board here, bishop f4, Magnus gleefully covers the diagonal towards his king, and now Gukesh should again bring a rook to the centre. Instead, he goes bishop d6, swapping those ones off, but he's helping Magnus. We see takes, queen recaptures with check. Magnus, of course, blocks with the queen here, and he'd love to get the ladies off the board. The best move for black is to not do so. These are some of the squares available. Keep attacking the white king, which is weaker than the black king. But Gukesh goes rook a d8, and of course, Magnus swaps those queens off the board. Loves himself an endgame. Few of the audience members start bleating. He's the endgame goat. We see rook recaptures, rook a d1, very natural, keeping an eye on d4, and after rook f d8, that's a double stack that Burger King would be proud of. Magnus doesn't play king g3. Looks really natural, but instead he goes rook f4. What's he up to here? Well, he wants to probe those queenside pawns. b5 is actually the best structure, but Gukesh pushes the c pawn, covering some great squares, preparing d4, but now Magnus swings. It's like a giant game of operation, but he's got the steadier hand. His opponent goes a6. Now rook a5, absolute probing, surgery, filigree precision. That pawn now under fire. If you go b6, a6 drops. If you come with one of the rooks, then you run into e4, because now there's these pins here. It's just constantly good for Magnus. So the best move is played, pawn b5. Thankfully the rook on d6 covers a6, but now Magnus picks up the a pawn, plows it down the board, taking a tin opener to the queen side here, and Gukesh finds bishop e8. Covering the structure, good move. King g3 marching in. What a game this is. Tension, queenside versus kingside pawn majorities. d4 from Gukesh. Push 'em baby, says the great Yasser Serwan. Something about this picture kind of looks like the mouth of Sauron. Sorry Yasser, I'm only playing. I used to look like Smeagol as a kid. Both of these pawns now under fire, a6 and c5, and this is why Magnus didn't take off the rooks. Great chess, c4 now played, a6 drops here, and after captures on a4, look at those pawns. I'm hearing Prokofiev in my head. Those horns, those pawns running, deadly, dangerous, but Magnus's rook's active, or at least this one here. He now plays bishop f3, tidy move, micro improvement. We see rook c8 on the board and rook c3. Blockades the march of that c pawn. King f8 played. Rook a7. Look at all the rooks and kings landing on dark squares. It's no coincidence when you've got the light squared bishops on the board. Now rook d2, and look where Gukesh is heading, snaking around. King f4 played, rook b2, now we see g5, and Magnus gets his own pawn armada rolling. Rook b3, great move. Magnus steps back. Doesn't want to give the connected passed pawns, of course. We see the c pawn advancing. Now bishop d5, the preferred move of Stock Squid, but Magnus goes bishop e4. Also good, very natural, covering c2. Rook c4 on the board, pin and win baby. King e3 breaks that pin, walks into a check, but this is what Magnus has got planned. Bishop d3. It's given a great move symbol because it was the only move to keep the balance of the position. And now the rook is attacked, but this is a pin, so you don't actually have to move it. a3 the best move, and I like this one because then it frees up the a4 square for rook a4, but it was missed. They're so low on time. This a very natural move. Now we see king d4 pressuring the rook. It's supported by the second. Again, you've got all those pieces on dark squares, and now what does Magnus do? He pushes forth with pawn to e4. Those ones are rolling. He's humming under his breath. They see me rolling. They hating. a3 played. e5 on the board. Something wicked this way comes. And what does Gukesh do? Well, like so many before him, he cracks under the immense pressure of playing the endgame goat. His best move here is apparently rook c7. Definitely some logic to that. Challenge this very active piece. Instead, we see rook c8 defending the back rank, also of course coming away from the attack of the king on c5, but now Magnus goes pawn e6. They're in the face of the black king, and the defensive moves get harder and harder to spot. a2 apparently good, chucking a pawn, distracting the rook, but this one played, keeping an eye on the 6th rank. Magnus should now just take the pawn on a3 apparently, best move, but he goes bishop e4, called a miss for that reason. We get check, king e5 played, and now rook d2, the only way to keep some kind of balance. But Gukesh misses it, goes rook d1, looks terminal for white, except you can just take the pawn on c2. Gukesh has miscalculated, incredibly low on time. This one drops off the board, bishop recaptures, Magnus a pawn ahead, and look how deadly they are. He checks, king d6, you can't even check from d1. So rook e3 played, covering the a pawn, and now f6. Those pawns more deadly than a Kasparov death stare, and it forces resignation from Gukesh. Those are going to go through. What to do here? I mean, say you capture a pawn, then attack the bishop. This is how a line could go, threatening now a mate in 1. You can check, the king can move, check, bishop blocks. Just want to show you one sample line, which I find really fun, because this is how the pawns can now march on in. Mate is soon on the way. This king now boxed in, mate in 1 threatened. You can check once more. Bishop e4 playable, but how about this one? Sidestep, a2 played, now check, drive the king out, check it some more, a queen about to be made, but this is hilarious because you can check. This king now has to go to d6 or d7, because if you come to f6, then you've just found a way to blunder the game in 1. Black can even make a bishop. How about that for flipping the table, changing the script? That would be a checkmate for black. But of course, none of that has to be played. You can sidestep this way, on goes the game, queen's going to be made soon, and that is a winning position. This is the final one, amazing game, and look what Magnus did in this tournament. This game started a streak of 10 in a row. Blitz games, wins, we've never seen anything like it. Unprecedented. And if you want to see the entire playlist of games from this tournament, then check out the videos on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.